It was 5 in the morning when I saw the glint of moonlight reflecting off my missing water. At first, I thought I was imagining things, just another weird trick of the dawn haze drifting across my ranch. But there it was, a stream of water snaking across the fence line, disappearing into my neighbor Karen's yard like a thief in the night. My water, the same meticulously filtered well water I use for my livestock and slaughterhouse sanitizing, was being hijacked to wash a pearl-white Range Rover parked on her paver driveway. I followed the hose like it was leading me to the gates of hell. And it was Karen's backyard. There she stood, bathrobe flapping in the breeze, coffee in one hand and a smug smirk on her face, pressure washer in the other, blasting yesterday's dust off her luxury ride using my ranch's lifeblood. That was the moment I knew. She wasn't just a bad neighbor. She was an enemy of the state, my state. The thing about living on a ranch is you get used to the rhythms of the land. You feel when something's off. The soil talks. The pipes groan differently. That morning, when I went to do my regular check on the water levels before starting my chores, the gauge was off. The main tank was drawing too fast, too early. I'm not some weekend cowboy with a hobby farm. This is a full-scale operation, and every gallon counts. So I checked the filtration output, followed the pipelines, and that's when I noticed a drop in pressure near the southern valve. I thought maybe an animal chewed through something again. But no. No wildlife. Just wild Karen. I stood frozen for a second, watching her work like she owned the place. She even had spa music playing through an outdoor speaker setup. The nerve. I cleared my throat loud enough to shake the birds out of the trees. She didn't flinch. Just raised her mug and said, "Oh, morning. Hope you don't mind. I figured the overflow could use a purpose." Overflow. Overflow. My water, drawn through underground filtration, passed through UV treatment systems, then pressurized for livestock hydration and food-grade cleaning, was apparently overflow in Karen's world. And that was only the beginning of her delusion. I tried to be civil. I told her it wasn't okay. That the water was private property, drawn from a well I had installed and maintained for over 15 years. That it wasn't free to use, and definitely not for power washing her already obnoxiously clean SUV. She waved me off with a laugh and said, "Oh come on, it's not like I'm draining your pond or something. It's just water. Sharing is caring." I wanted to throttle the garden gnome next to her just to release the tension building in my chest. When I followed the hose back to my side, I realized how carefully she'd done it. She'd waited for me to be away last weekend at the state fair, where I was selling grass-fed beef and giving a slaughterhouse safety seminar. While I was talking about humane practices and wastewater management, Karen was out here playing aqueduct engineer with my infrastructure. She'd tapped into one of my auxiliary lines that I'd left capped near the fence, meant for emergencies or drought contingencies. She had unscrewed it, added her own splitter, and buried the extension under a patch of fake grass. She even zip-tied the hose to the fence post to keep it steady. I called the HOA that same morning. Big mistake. Turns out Karen's cousin, Dale, is the president of the board. He picked up and acted like I was the one causing drama. "Well, technically, the property line is fuzzy in that corner," he said, chewing something obnoxiously loud into the receiver. "And besides, Karen said she's only using runoff. If anything, she's helping you by preventing water waste." I could feel my molars grinding. When I asked if anyone had checked the actual water bills, he laughed and said, "Nobody really monitors that stuff. It's just water, buddy." I wasn't their buddy. By noon, I received a notice in my mailbox, a citation from the HOA for improper water discharge causing neighborhood disruption. It claimed I had violated landscaping regulations by not securing my external lines from public access. Karen had turned the crime around on me. She must have taken photos, made it look like I was the one leaving hoses open and unattended. The HOA fine was $200. Petty, sure. But it wasn't about the money. It was about principle. And now it was personal. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cold beer, watching Karen rinse her car again. She had friends over. They were laughing, spraying each other with my water like they were at some sort of luxury ranch resort. One of them shouted, "It's so crisp. Is this mountain spring water?" Karen replied, "It's local filtered stuff from the ranch next door. The owners chill with it." Chill. Chill. If by chill she meant calculating the pounds of animal waste I could legally dump on her lawn without violating city ordinances, then sure, I was the Iceman. I didn't sleep much that night. I paced the hallways, muttering to myself about legal options, plumbers, water access laws, and revenge scenarios that would make Quentin Tarantino blush. But then, somewhere around 3:14 a.m., staring at the glow of my old water pressure monitor, I had an idea. A wild, devious, brilliant idea. I remembered something. A line. A forgotten pipeline that once connected the slaughterhouse's secondary waste tank to the old compost runoff field. It hadn't been used in years, but it was still functional. And more importantly, it was parallel to the very line Karen had tapped. The setup would take some finesse. I'd need to verify flow directions, isolate the pressure, and make sure the waste was stable enough to push through without breaking her equipment. And I had to be careful not to break any laws. After all, I wasn't some vengeful maniac. I was a man of principles. A man who believed that if you steal from someone else, eventually the universe makes you drink from the wrong cup. Karen had chosen to take what wasn't hers. To lie about it, to get me fined, and to pretend like my ranch, my livelihood, was her private spa. But she was about to learn the difference between filtered water and what came out the other end of the pipeline at a full-scale slaughterhouse on processing day. And I'd be there, with popcorn, when the truth came spraying back in her face. You said. By the next morning, Karen had gone full-blown car wash entrepreneur. She'd upgraded from just hosing her own Range Rover to hosting a suburban auto spa, right there in her driveway. There were folding chairs, a pop-up canopy for shade, a cooler with drinks, and a sign taped to her mailbox that read, "Free wash, premium filtered water." The sign had glitter. Glitter. I stood on my porch sipping my coffee, watching as two more SUVs pulled in like they were attending some weird HOA block party. Meanwhile, my livestock troughs were running low and I had to delay cleaning out the slaughterhouse prep room because pressure was still unstable on the south line. My cattle mooed in confusion, and I couldn't even blame them. Karen had turned my ranch into her own boutique detailing station, and the worst part was, she was getting away with it. She strutted around like she'd invented water, offering her guests hydration spritzes, using a mist attachment. One lady asked if she could fill her dog's bowl with it. Karen replied, "Of course. This stuff is amazing. It comes straight from next door, but it's like artesian? Or whatever the fancy word is." I choked on my coffee. Artesian. She was siphoning filtered water meant for sanitizing meat processing equipment and treating it like she'd found the fountain of youth. To add insult to injury, the HOA newsletter came out that same day, featuring a front-page article titled, "Local Resident Offers Eco-Friendly Car Wash Alternative." The photo? Karen holding a hose like Lady Liberty. I had officially entered the Twilight Zone. So I called my cousin Kenny. Kenny works with me at the slaughterhouse and has a background in plumbing and what he calls strategic mischief. I told him my plan, the old compost line, the idea of rerouting the flow. He listened without interrupting, and when I was done, he said, "So basically, you want to give her the moo juice? That's one way to put it." "I'm in," he said, already grabbing his toolbox before I even hung up. The old compost line hadn't been touched in years, but it was still structurally sound. It used to funnel excess liquid from the slaughterhouse's cleaning tanks to a compost field where it'd soak into manure piles for breakdown. It was non-toxic, but no one in their right mind would ever mistake it for drinking water. Brown, chunky, and with the distinct aroma of fear and fermented hay, it was the stuff of septic nightmares. We did some tests to make sure the valves were intact, ran a safety flush through it, and confirmed that it could handle enough pressure to reach Karen's tap point. The best part? Her setup worked against her. She had buried her connection just deep enough to avoid suspicion, but shallow enough for us to reroute the flow beneath her fence line. Once she turned on her pump again, the pressure would reverse pull what she thought was filtered water, but now came from the compost tank instead. We waited until nightfall. Kenny and I dug near the fence, careful to avoid damaging anything on her side. Using thermal imaging and an old ranch blueprint, we locked in on the line. Then came the delicate work, splicing the hose without leaving signs of tampering. Kenny, with his usual flair, brought a remote-controlled valve he'd rigged up using an old pressure switch and some spare parts from a lawn sprinkler. We could turn the flow on and off with a key fob. It was beautiful. It was art. By sunrise, everything was in place. And wouldn't you know it, Karen had another wash scheduled. This time it was a garden party/car detail brunch. Her guests pulled in around 9 a.m., carrying mimosa coolers and Tupperware full of deviled eggs. Someone even brought a portable Bluetooth speaker and started blasting early 2000s pop hit. They had no idea what was coming. I activated the pressure valve when Karen picked up the hose and started her usual dramatic spray arc, like she was christening a new yacht. At first, it looked normal. Water flowed. The spritz began. Then came the clog. A brief sputter. And then it hit. A geyser of brown sludge blasted out of the nozzle with the force of a fire hydrant in a Michael Bay movie. Karen shrieked. The spray hit her square in the chest, coating her robe and dripping down into her sandals. Her Range Rover got the worst of it. 1 second it was shimmering white. The next, it looked like it had been used to transport fertilizer during a hurricane. Her friends screamed. One tripped over a garden gnome and face-planted into the lawn. Another tried to run but slipped on the sludge and skidded across the driveway like a contestant on a Japanese game show. Karen dropped the hose, gagging, yelling, "What is this? What is this?" Her friend answered, "It smells like dead cow." Another lady shrieked, "It's chunky." "Why is it chunky?" From my porch, I sipped coffee and casually flipped open the ranch camera app on my phone. I had a direct feed from the compost valve to the hose output. Full color. 1080p, I clicked the record button and smiled. Karen fumbled with the hose controls but made the mistake of turning the pressure up, thinking it was a clog. That unleashed a full blast of wastewater straight into the side of her car, splattering her guests in the process. One guy cursed and ran for his BMW, only to smear the door handle with what looked like beef grease. Another screamed, "My Birkenstocks!" as he tried to hose off his legs using Karen's lawn sprinkler. Meanwhile, I was dying of silent laughter. My cattle, oddly entertained by the chaos, had wandered up to the fence to watch. One even mooed approvingly, as if to say, "Revenge is best served wet and smelly." Karen stormed toward my fence line, dripping in what could generously be called sludge. "You did this," she screamed. I shrugged and said, "Looks like your artisanal pipeline tapped a bad vein." She fumed, shaking like a raccoon in a rainstorm. "You poisoned me. I'm going to call the police." By the time the cops arrived, she had changed clothes but couldn't get the smell out of her hair. I showed them my security footage, the valve logs, and proof of my water rights. Karen tried to argue, claiming I had sabotaged her system. The officer looked at her driveway, then at me, then back at Karen, and said, "Ma'am, I think you sabotaged yourself. I could have ended it there. I could have shut off the valve and returned to life as usual." But Karen had poked the wrong bear. I'd been civil. I'd warned her. She made this war, and now I was just getting started. Karen came at me like a wounded hyena, hair frizzed, clothes stained with the remnants of processed cattle runoff, and the stench of humiliation wafting off her like she'd bathed in a dumpster behind a butcher shop. She stood on her driveway, holding her phone in the air as if it were a badge of honor. "I have it all recorded," she screamed. "You'll pay for this. This is biological assault." I was in the middle of cleaning one of my water tanks, trying hard not to burst out laughing. Karen was foaming at the mouth, though it might have just been leftover sludge. Either way, she was coming in hot. And behind her, her Range Rover looked like it had been involved in a mudslide at a meatpacking plant. 10 minutes later, 2 squad cars pulled into the cul-de-sac. Lights flashing. Sirens off, but the kind of entrance that screams, "Somebody called over cow poop." Officers Delgado and Mendez stepped out, familiar faces around here. We'd dealt with each other before, usually when someone in the HOA tried to report my ranch dogs for barking too aggressively. I waved. They nodded. Karen, on the other hand, came running toward them, pointing dramatically like she was a victim in a courtroom reenactment. "That man," she declared, "connected a sewage line to my water supply. I was poisoned. So were my friends. It's a health emergency. Someone could have died." Officer Delgado calmly held up his hand. "Ma'am, slow down. Start from the beginning." She launched into a story so far from reality it could have qualified for science fiction. According to her, I had broken into her yard, sabotaged her hose, and released biochemical waste, in an attempt to publicly embarrass and physically harm her and her guests. Mendez shot me a look like, "Is this for real?" I didn't say a word. I just handed over a USB stick with the footage from both my property's cameras and the compost line's flow log. I even included the HOA map that clearly showed the pipeline was on my land and not under their jurisdiction. Delgado plugged it into his cruiser's dashboard tablet while Karen stood smugly nearby, arms folded, already fantasizing about the lawsuit she was going to file. That smirk didn't last long. About 30 seconds into the footage, where she can be seen hooking up a splitter to my capped valve and running the line under her fake grass, Delgado stopped the playback and stepped out of the car. He raised one eyebrow and said, "Ma'am, this appears to be your own installation, and the water line clearly starts on Mr. Jensen's property." Karen blinked. But that doesn't mean he can send filth into it." Mendez cut in. "Ma'am, the valve was closed until you activated it. We can't exactly arrest someone for what happens when you tap into their system without permission." "But it was just water," she yelled, pointing at me again. "He switched it out to hurt me." I finally spoke. "No, ma'am. I rerouted my own non-potable compost water through my own private pipe. You're the one who connected to it." Mendez glanced at his partner, clearly trying to suppress a laugh. "It's like breaking into someone's fridge and getting mad there's no soda." Karen was livid. She demanded a full investigation. So the officers obliged, probably more to humor her than anything else. They spent the next half-hour walking her yard, taking photos, and interviewing a few of her traumatized brunch guests, one of whom still had a glob of mystery sludge on her Birkenstock. In the end, they thanked me for the footage and left Karen with a friendly warning: cease unauthorized utility use or face trespassing charges. I watched her jaw drop like someone had unplugged her entire personality. She wasn't done, though. 2 days later, I received a formal letter from the HOA demanding I attend an emergency conduct hearing. Apparently, Karen had leveraged her cousin Dale, still acting president, to summon a closed-door meeting over aggressive neighbor behavior. I showed up with documents, photos, my cousin Kenny, and the same thumb drive the officers had reviewed. The meeting took place in the community rec room, which was somehow both too hot and aggressively beige. Karen and Dale sat at the head of the table, acting like we were in front of the Supreme Court. Dale opened the meeting by stating I had conducted a retaliatory plumbing maneuver that endangered residents. I nearly laughed out loud. I asked to play my video. Dale tried to object, but 2 of the board members, who'd clearly heard rumors, insisted on seeing the evidence. The room watched in complete silence as Karen was caught in 4K, tap dancing over legal lines and hooking into my water system with the finesse of a raccoon with a screwdriver. The video then cut to the fateful brunch incident, including the moment Karen took a full-face shot of processed beef runoff. Someone gasped. Someone else coughed to cover a laugh. One lady straight up wheezed into her handbag. When the video ended, I sat back and folded my arms. Now, unless there are any questions. Dale looked like he was about to boil. Karen was redder than a smoked brisket. One board member leaned forward. Do we even have any jurisdiction over his water line? No, another one said. That's private land. It's not HOA managed. Well then, the first board member continued, I think this hearing is a waste of time. And just like that, the tide turned. Dale stammered something about neighborhood harmony, but it was clear nobody was backing Karen's nonsense anymore. Before leaving, I handed the board copies of the cease and desist letter I was serving both Karen and the HOA for attempting to regulate utilities outside their domain. The next day, I filed a lawsuit for water theft and tampering. My lawyer, a bulldog of a woman named Beth, who once sued an entire city over faulty sewer permits, was giddy at the case. She said it was like Christmas came early. We filed for damages including water usage, pipeline repairs, livestock impact, and business interruption. Karen, in a genius move, filed a countersuit, claiming emotional distress and organic contamination. Her lawyer barely lasted a week before dropping her as a client, citing conflicting versions of events. Within a week, Karen's world started unraveling. Dale was forced to step down from the HOA board due to a conflict of interest violation. Karen began circulating flyers to neighbors trying to garner sympathy, but most were still too busy laughing at the driveway incident. My favorite was a handmade sign she taped to her garage. Victim of domestic sewage terrorism. Someone added a sticky note beneath it that said, You misspelled karma. With her car ruined, her reputation in shambles, and legal fees piling up, Karen tried to play the victim card one last time at a neighborhood potluck. She stood near the dessert table, dramatically holding a cup of sparkling water and saying things like, You never really know someone until they attack your plumbing. I didn't say a word. I just walked past, dropped off a tray of beef sliders with a handwritten sign that read, Filtered to perfection, and smiled. The neighbors chuckled. Karen disappeared before the cornbread hit the table. And that, I thought, was the end. But Karen still had one more ridiculous scheme up her sleeve. And this time, it involved soil, plants, and a so-called miracle garden that would backfire in a way even I didn't see coming. Just when I thought Karen had finally hit rock bottom, covered in cow sludge, legally defeated, and publicly humiliated, she decided to dig even deeper. Literally. I noticed it one morning while feeding the cattle. There she was, out in her backyard wearing oversized gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed sun hat that made her look like a villain in a kid's cartoon. She was digging, planting, watering. A lot. Like way more than usual. Half her lawn had been torn up and replaced with raised garden beds, planter boxes, and what appeared to be a small irrigation system. Her driveway still bore the faint outline of sludge stains, but that didn't stop her from turning the rest of her property into a full-blown Eden project. I watched from a distance, sipping coffee and narrowing my eyes like a detective spotting the first clue in a mystery he never asked to solve. 2 days later, flyers started showing up in mailboxes. Glossy, double-sided, full-color flyers. Karen's Organic Garden Elixir. Locally enhanced growth formula, 100% natural. At first, I thought it was a joke, but there was a website link, a list of ingredients, and a smiling photo of Karen standing next to a tomato plant the size of a small child. The description read, Formulated with nutrient-rich runoff and eco-sustainable compost hydration, sourced from premium ranch flow. My jaw dropped. I reread it 3 times. She was bottling my compost wastewater. She wasn't hiding it. She was selling it. I showed the flyer to Kenny, who nearly dropped his breakfast. She's selling cow juice as plant food? He asked, choking on a piece of toast. What, does she think she discovered manure? But this wasn't just composted dirt. This was water mixed with traces of animal blood, bone particles, protein sludge, and whatever else gets rinsed out during a full cleaning cycle at a meat processing facility. It wasn't intended for consumption. Definitely not for resale. And now Karen was touting it as the next miracle growth serum, like she'd unlocked some kind of botanical superpower. Things escalated quickly. Within the week, Karen was on a local lifestyle blog. There was a video interview of her walking through her garden, pointing to massive zucchinis and sunflowers tall enough to cast shade on her roof. "It's all about using what nature gives you," she said to the camera. "My secret? Local ranch runoff. Totally natural. Totally effective. And it's just going to waste otherwise." My name wasn't mentioned, but anyone in the community could put two and two together. My phone started blowing up. Neighbors wanted to know if I was partnering with her. Some even asked where they could get more of the elixir. I wasn't angry at first, just stunned. It was like watching someone steal your garbage and win a blue ribbon for it. But then things took a turn. One of her neighbors, a sweet retired couple named the Gibsons, bought a few bottles to use on their vegetable garden. Within days, they started noticing a weird smell. Then, their dog got sick. Then, mushrooms started popping up around their tomatoes. Thick, yellowish things that didn't belong in any edible ecosystem. They called me in a panic. I took one sniff and knew immediately what had happened. That wasn't compost water anymore. That was bacteria-laced slaughterhouse runoff that had fermented in the sun. Left unchecked, it could turn septic, grow pathogens, and contaminate any plant it touched. I called the state agricultural board. They didn't laugh. They launched a formal inquiry. The next week, Karen's house was visited by 2 inspectors wearing boots, gloves, and hazard masks. They spent over an hour in her backyard taking soil samples, water samples, and a few of the bottled elixir containers she'd been selling out of her garage. Karen tried to play it cool. "It's just natural," she said over and over. "It's from the earth. It's how people farmed for centuries." The lead inspector looked her straight in the eye and said, "Ma'am, people didn't used to water their lettuce with blood plasma." 2 days later, I got a call. They'd found traces of animal byproducts not approved for agricultural distribution. There were elevated bacteria levels, pathogenic indicators, and other delightful little surprises that came from letting cow runoff stew in plastic bottles under the sun for weeks. The garden was deemed a biohazard. Karen was slapped with multiple fines for unlicensed distribution of agricultural substances, improper storage of organic waste, and potential contamination of adjacent properties. Her website was shut down. Her produce stand was confiscated. Even the HOA had to put out an emergency bulletin warning residents not to use anything labeled Karen's Garden Elixir. But the real kicker came when the news picked up the story. A local station ran a headline that read, "Suburban Garden Turns Biohazard Nightmare." There was footage of Karen being interviewed in her driveway again, this time holding a wilting cabbage and shouting about how the government was killing innovation. The anchor chuckled as she wrapped up the segment by saying, "Let's leave the fertilizer to the professionals." And just when you think karma had finally done its job, the internet got a hold of it. My security footage of the original car wash incident had already gone semi-viral. But now, with this follow-up story, it exploded. A popular meme account reposted a still frame of Karen mid-spray with the caption, "When your Range Rover gets a beef broth bath." Within days, there were parody TikToks, reenactments, even a remix video someone made using dance beats and cow moos. Karen had become a walking punchline, a suburban legend known across the internet as Compost Karen. She tried to fight it. She released a video of her own, tearfully explaining her journey as a misunderstood innovator. She called me a water hoarder and accused the AG board of targeting female entrepreneurs. The comments were brutal. One user replied, "Ma'am, you sold cow blood in a bottle. This isn't Shark Tank." Karen's garden was destroyed. The inspectors ordered the entire backyard to be tilled and treated. She had to pay for professional cleanup, including soil detoxification and chemical neutralization. Neighbors avoided her like she had a contagious disease. The HOA quietly removed her from all garden-related committees and banned homemade fertilizer sales without inspection. I thought that was it. Game over. I had the last laugh. But then, one morning, I saw a moving truck in front of Karen's house. Not because she was leaving, but because she was trying to rent out her place. She'd put it on the market. Open house, reduced rent, no mention of the organic incident. I stopped by out of curiosity, just to see if she had the guts to pretend none of this ever happened. And that's when I saw it. A family of 4, freshly arrived from another state, walking the yard with a real estate agent. Karen stood nearby, smiling tightly, hoping no one noticed the patches of brown dirt and the faint, lingering scent of sterilized doom. I leaned against my fence and muttered to myself, "Let's see how long that peace lasts." Because as far as I was concerned, Karen had gotten off light. And if she thought she could just scrub away the smell and forget the past, she was in for a rude, unforgettable surprise. The final drip of this saga hadn't fallen yet. But oh, it was coming. Karen thought a coat of fresh paint and a rental sign would fix everything. Her front yard had been resodded, the garden beds ripped out and replaced with decorative rocks, and the driveway power-washed so many times it looked bleached. The listing on the rental site described the property as a charming suburban oasis with eco-friendly landscaping. Nowhere did it mention the part about the slaughterhouse runoff, or the biohazard fine, or the national attention she got after spraying half the neighborhood in liquefied cow organs. But that didn't matter to Karen. She was banking on one thing and one thing only: that people forget, that the internet moves on, that memory fades faster than the scent of sun-baked bovine protein. Unfortunately for her, she still lived next to me. I watched potential renters come and go. Most were polite, nodding as the real estate agent made up some excuse about the previous tenant being a wellness enthusiast with strong gardening interests. Some were less subtle. One teenage girl recognized Karen from a viral TikTok and screamed, "Mom, this is the meat lady's house," before running back to the car. I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the hay bale I was hauling. Karen didn't laugh. She glared at me like I was the reason her life had turned into a 3-act tragedy. In reality, she was the playwright, the cast, and the audience. When it became clear that renting wouldn't be easy, Karen tried a different tactic. One morning, she showed up at my front gate with a checkbook and what I can only describe as an apology face poorly stapled onto a grudge. She said she wanted to make amends. Said she realized things had gone too far. She even offered to pay me back for the water she borrowed. Her exact words. Borrowed. Like she was going to give it back. I let her talk, mostly because watching her squirm gave me immense satisfaction. Then I reached out, took the check from her hand, and ripped it clean down the middle without saying a word. She gasped like I'd slapped her with a raw steak. "You don't get to fix this with a check," I said. "You want to make amends? There's a pen back at the slaughterhouse that needs scrubbing. Real fertilizer work. No filters. No bottled branding." She recoiled like I'd asked her to shovel radioactive waste. "Are you serious?" "As a heart attack." She turned without another word, stormed off like she was expecting applause. I went back to work, whistling, knowing that was probably the last time she'd try to apologize. But I wasn't done yet. I made a few calls. Had some friends from the local sanitation department come by to inspect the remnants of her garden runoff one last time. While everything had technically been cleared, they made some interesting discoveries, like improperly buried containers that still held trace elements of contaminated water. Apparently, she'd tried to preserve her miracle elixir underground in case she could revive the brand later. The city ordered a second remediation. Karen was furious. She accused me of harassment. I responded by installing a brand new security camera facing the property line, with floodlights, and a blinking red rec indicator just for effect. Word got around the neighborhood fast. Karen's place was now known as the Hazmat House. Trick-or-treaters skipped it during Halloween. The HOA started referring to her violations as the organic incident in internal documents. She stopped showing her face at events altogether. The very people who once backed her suddenly stopped replying to her emails, her texts, her potluck invites. She went from queen bee to social leper in less than a season. And that's when I decided to have a little fun. With the lot next door to Karen's now up for auction, one she had previously tried to use as overflow parking for her car washing guests, I made an offer. A generous one. And I bought it. The lot wasn't huge, but it was enough for a statement. Within 2 weeks, construction began. Karen stood in her yard every morning watching the trucks roll in, her face contorted in pure confusion. She asked the workers what they were building. They smiled and shrugged. I stayed quiet. When it was finished, she found out the hard way. Right on the edge of the property line, facing her kitchen window, stood a statue. 8 feet tall, cast in resin and polished to shine. A cow. A majestic, triumphant cow, reared back on its hind legs like it was roaring at the heavens. Beneath it, a fountain gently bubbled a steady stream of clear water from the cow's, well, let's say, rear end, into a trough. A little plaque read, "In honor of free-flowing karma." The first time Karen saw it, she screamed loud enough to send birds flying from trees. She called the city, the HOA, even tried to call the police. None could do anything. The installation was on private property, zoned for artistic displays, and, my favorite part, certified as a fully functioning decorative water feature. I had it plumbed with clean recycled rainwater, fully up to code. It even ran on solar. People came to visit. Tourists. Locals. Kids took pictures with it. Someone added it to an online list of top 10 petty landowner wins in America. One neighbor brought me a bottle of wine and said, "I've lived here 20 years. That's the greatest thing I've ever seen." Karen eventually stopped trying to fight it. She shut her curtains, built a tall fence, and pretended the cow didn't exist. But she couldn't avoid what came next. A real estate appraiser came through and gave her property a dramatically reduced value due to localized stigma and past soil contamination. She cried about it at an HOA meeting, but nobody came to her defense. Her cousin Dale had already moved away, citing too much drama. I went about my business, ranch running smoother than ever, water pressure right where it should be. The compost line was sealed off again, permanently this time. But every now and then I'd walk out to the fence, look at that glorious fountain, and feel a deep, satisfying peace. Karen came for my water like it was free. She stole, lied, accused, and tried to turn the whole neighborhood against me. But in the end, the only thing she managed to soak herself in was karma. Thick, smelly, unforgettable karma. And it stuck to her a lot longer than any of that compost ever did.